I've known Sally for a little bit. She's been a longtime friend of the organization and has done an incredible amount of work here related to Badger-Two medicine, particularly the relationship between Blackfeet people and that sacred landscape to the Amskapi Bakani. She helped lead some of the early ethnographic work that was done in response to the proposed oil and gas drilling I mentioned earlier. And that helped key up even more ethnographic work that was done by the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, John Murray, who's a close friend of the organization, and helped lead to the designation of that area as a traditional cultural district under the National Historic Preservation Act. So a nice chain of people who've helped in this long process of recognizing both the cultural and the ecological values of that landscape. And you might talk a little bit about that tonight, because I know there's a story in her book. So Sally Thompson is a gifted storyteller who uncovers the revelatory power of the past and weaves it together to reveal the rich fabric of the cultures and histories of the Rocky Mountain West. Anthropologist Sally Thompson is an engaging speaker, an experienced workshop leader whose career in the Rocky Mountains and American Southwest has spanned more than 4 decades. She received her PhD from the University of Colorado the same year she moved to Missoula in 1980. She has worked as an archaeologist, ethnohistorian, educator, filmmaker, and tribal consultant and collaborator. We're so privileged to have you with us tonight, Sally. Thanks for making the journey up.
It's wonderful to be back here. I think I gave a talk to this group in this room when people before the park came out, and it was a decade ago. So, no, I don't. But this is, it was a horse that caused me this problem, and I'll adapt in a similar way. Because I need an extra hand here to hold the book when I want to read. I wanted to say that this organization is really important to me, and I'm grateful to be able to share this work of mine with you, because a lot of it has taken place in this general region. So this book, Disturbing the Sleeping Buffalo, came about because, well, I was working on the other book that's back on the table called Black Robes Enter Coyote's World, and that was kind of a career-long journey to try and write that book. It was very laborious and difficult in many steps, and so it just took forever, and I was kind of losing hope. Anyway, a friend of mine said, while you're waiting to hear back from Nebraska Press, why don't you just write up those stories you like to tell? I always do things the hard way, and that sounded kind of easy, because I tell them anyway. I bet I could just write them down. So this was kind of a labor of love. It was easy and came quickly, and it has some levity that the other one maybe doesn't. Once I decided to do it, I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction to tell you how it came about from once I had decided. So my first task was to figure out which tales to tell. I began the cumbersome task of excavating through my ample files and journals, looking for compelling stories. Like finely flaked projectile points found during a dig, topics revealed by my mental trowel sorted themselves into folders. Contents came from both written and oral histories and from my own experiences. The process stirred up old memories, many of them unrelated to the focus of the work. For instance, from a long ago summer spent surveying in the Tongue River, I remembered seeing 3 colors of rattlesnakes, green like the prickly pear, red like the sandstone, and beige like the sear soil. In my mind's eye, the colors are still vivid, as are the ridge tops and bottomlands where I walked. Near Townsend one June, I was delighted by an unexpected field of blooming bitterroots along an old Salish trail to the Musselshell River. These ancillary experiences return me to the places where they happened. These kinds of experiences, like the first time one sees fireflies or witnesses a large owl glide past, are the ones that carry the memories forward. I believe we remember these times because of the emotional responses that take us beyond data collecting. We've all had such moments. Montana's varied and magnificent character provides a wealth of opportunity for such memories to form, and always has. Sharing our stories about her is part of what it means to belong here. So that's the energy I carried into writing this book. And it ended up, the publisher, Far Country, really wanted me to have it be statewide, stories of Montana. But my life hasn't been statewide. I have pockets that I especially love and have ended up, trying to work in those areas. So the book reflects that. The first section is on overland journeys that do kind of cross the state, and they mostly challenge our foundational stories. So Larry, there's some real challenges to the Lewis and Clark point of view, because you can't know everything through the lens of white male military expedition, right? So my interest is almost always in trying to uncover what's normally not seen, or to think about what's missing from a story. So to thinking beyond what we're told, because it's pretty easy to just follow a thread and end up accepting it. So to really be thinking under that. So anyway, that's the first section, and they're fun. One involves a Blackfeet story of witnessing Lewis and Clark come by that was only noted like 100 years later in somebody's compilation of things he'd heard. Kind of like a book like this, but much more detailed. And then part 2 is Northwest Montana, where I've done a lot of work with the Kootenays, and then part 3 is the Buffalo Commons, and so central Montana. Part 4 is the Clark Fork Basin, where I live, and I live in Missoula. And then the final part 5, is the Rocky Mountain Front. So here we are, and I thought I would just focus on those stories since they're of a place you all know and love. And if we have any time to chat about the rest later, we sure can. So the first one is called Ancient Climate Refugees on the Sun River. So early in my career, when I was still doing archaeology, I had the great privilege really to get to be involved in an archaeological dig that's one of the most important sites in the state. And I'm just gonna read you a little bit just so you get some context of why this was a great project for me. My doctoral dissertation at the University of Colorado explored how indigenous people on the Great Plains adapted to major changes in climate since the end of the Pleistocene. At that time, I never imagined how big a topic climate change would become in our very lives. What I learned about the past, in short, is that people relocate to the mountain fringes during long dry periods. By sheer happenstance, after moving to Montana, I got the opportunity to delve more deeply into the subject through an archaeological site on the Sun River. So the site is about 5 miles above Great Falls on a big old oxbow. And it documents, well, I'll tell you quickly the story of how we found it. Some other archaeologists had missed something, and the National Historic Preservation Act requires certain procedures as you're investigating a site, and they'd messed something up. So we got hired to go in and kind of redo and see what we could learn. So the surface tests all showed there was stuff there, but it was all pretty messed up. There were a lot of floods and so disturbed sediments. And then we brought in a backhoe because there were really deep deposits because of all that on an oxbow turn, on that bend, you're getting sediments deposited a lot. So we're just kind of getting bored because 12 backhoe trenches, it's a huge area, and nothing, little teeny scatters of charcoal here and there, but nothing you'd call it a cultural floor. And so then the backhoe operator, who was a master, it was almost like he was taking a spoon. He was so clean in the way, the little shallow section, so he wouldn't really hammer anything. And so he says, okay, what do you think? It's been a 12, sounds like a round number, and I thought, let's just do one more. And sure enough, 6.5 feet under the ground, we start hitting intense cultural deposits. And then going down, that went down another 3 meters, I think. So, anyway, 10 more feet or something. So insane, right? What the challenge to then excavate this site, you first just have to get front end loaders moving a lot of dirt, and then go about the work. And it was 3 components that show climate shifts from 5,200, that was the bottom of it, then 4,500 years ago, and then 3,500 years ago. And at 5200, I'm gonna read this part because it was really interesting for me to go back to this, because back in the 80s, we dig this site, I write it up, with straight out of my graduate school mind. And then after all these years of working over here and knowing the way Native people understand their lands and move around them in a very predictable way, knowing where the resources are, knowing how to survive in tough times. So, let me see what page this is on. I made little notes. Hold this, okay. And then my hand really limits my efficiency. I know you're gonna give me a break. Okay, first, and I do wanna say that after really analyzing the artifacts from this site, I believe they're Blackfeet ancestors. So 5,200 years ago, and maybe the reason Blackfeet came here. Imagine a small band of people whose ancestors have had to leave their homeland to seek food and water. They've had to keep moving as the heat gets worse and water sources dry up. Think eastern Montana, 2025, the beginnings of this. Before they were born, during the time of their great-grandparents and earlier, conditions were so hot and so dry that some of their people didn't survive. Their ancestors had to leave their homeland across the prairie because their regular camp locations no longer had reliable water or enough food to support them all. These migrants settled closer to the mountains. In this particular year, the hottest months have passed. The women have gathered whatever berries and greens they can find. They have learned to gather quinapod, goosefoot seeds, to grind into flour for cooking, filling in because of the lack of food. Fall is the time to focus on bringing in whatever meat they can. They move to the sagebrush flats a few miles up a tributary from the Big River, not far from the high mountains, where pronghorn can usually be found. Their dogs haul their belongings lashed between two long poles. When they find the right spot, the women set up the lodges in a grove of struggling cottonwood trees clustered around a small spring. The men split into small groups and go in search of food. Some days are better than others. During their time in this camp near a big bend of the river, the men kill 4 pronghorn, 1 buffalo, and a deer. Boys manage to snare a bird and kill a jackrabbit. The women get right to work on processing the food. The bison is a scrawny old bull with little meat to give. The 4 pronghorn are thin, but still provide them with almost 100 pounds of fresh meat, along with fat and marrow from the long bones. This food, along with the mule deer meat, will feed the camp but won't provide extra for their traveling days, and certainly not what they need for winter. They waste nothing. Dogs whine as they smell meat cooking, but they stay outside the circle of women busy with their tasks. Not only do the women process marrow from the pronghorn long bones, but people break open the jaws and foot bones to suck out whatever they can get, even though none of these bones has much to offer. The Nunavut people of northern Alaska have an old saying about times like these. They say, the wolf moves when he hears the Eskimo breaking caribou mandibles for marrow. He knows there's nothing going to be left at that camp, right? In other words, the wolves sense the extreme hunger of the people when they hear them breaking jawbones for food. The broken mandibles at Sun River attest to the hunger of its occupants. So that bleak time appears to be kind of the end of the most intense period of what a lot of people call the altithermal. Now it's like the climate maximum. But so people out on the prairie, you think about the water sources. If those springs dry up, all you got is like murky old, well, it still happens on the mussel shell sometimes, it just goes down to kind of brackish pools of undrinkable water on a really bad year. So there just wouldn't have been anything to drink. You would have had to relocate, give up your homeland, where you probably lived for thousands of years and try someplace else. But where you're gonna find variety and water is at the edge of the mountains. And this is true for the whole front down at least through Colorado, High Plains country, that's when the population just booms all of a sudden. Well, look at us with booming populations all around along the Rocky Mountain front, right? So then the middle period just shows a slightly improving period where bison are returning, so grasslands are returning. You know, sage has just taken over this area and pollen backed all that up, that the environment completely changed. The level of pine trees and everything just shifted up out of this dryness. And so things started returning. And there's, you know, quite a bit more meat taken at that component that was preserved 4,500 years ago. So 700 years after that first scene. And then the 3,500-year-old one appears like life has restored to kind of what we've known since then, generally. And a lot more variety of food and a more ample diet. So I think that's probably enough to say about it. There's a lot more details, and then how analysis of it, you know, really looks like it's Blackfeet. And just how water was the director of forced migrations and will always be. Okay, any comments on that before I go on to it?
Is it still being dug or working, anyone working there? Or is
No,
it done?
that met the letter of the law, but fortunately for some other reason, the Corps of Engineers did not use it as a borrow area that they had planned to. So I think it's planted there. So, and you know, you only dig part of a site so that as technology improves through time, you know, somebody else can go in there and learn more. And you also save all this stuff. It's not like we toss things once we wrote a book about it. So who knows, someday something more. But think about every river, you know, and the serendipity of a site being preserved instead of wiped out by a flood, you know, when they get well sealed and not disturbed. So yeah, serendipitous find. And then especially, you know, like if I hadn't said, oh, okay, one more,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
we would have written it off.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was nothing of value there. So you just wonder how often that happens, because I mean, we dug through a lot of sterile soil before we got to that site. Right?
Sally, how did you, what was the method or the system that you used at each of those levels, as far as the time frames? Dating it, basically.
All,
I was
mostly
curious.
charcoal being radiocarbon dated.
Okay.
And then it fit with the, actually all of the projectile points were what called oxbow points, for those of you who are familiar. I don't know if anybody can kind of see this picture, but they have these rounded ears at the base. And these are all heavily sharpened, like they'd used them, and maybe in these camps disposed of them and replaced them with better, you know, with longer pieces. So I think this was one broken one, yeah, it broke probably in manufacture. That would have been more the size they were aiming for, but then they would reuse. And you can kind of see that in the flaking patterns, how they resharpened tools. Very economical people. Because all of this was tough, you know, I mean, going to find good chert. There was one source of chert up in Glacier. You guys know it?
Yeah.
Bowman
chert.
Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay. The next one's an Old North Trail story. And, you know, for those, are you all familiar with the Old North Trail? Anybody not at all? Okay, good. So briefly, I say, I've been intrigued by the Old North Trail since I first read the account of Chief Brings Down the Sun, as he told it to Walter McClintock in 1905. And his words were, "There is a well-known trail we call the Old North Trail. It runs north and south along the Rocky Mountains. No one knows how long it has been used by the Indians. My father told me it originated in the migration of a great tribe of Indians from the distant north to the south, and all the tribes have ever since continued to follow in their tracks." So I address the scholarly debates about it, and that's in here, but it's not what I want to focus on today, other than to mention the Athabascan people of the Southwest migrated from Alaska 1,200 years ago when there was a big volcanic eruption there. So it took them several hundred years, like maybe even 1,200 to like 700 years to actually end up in the Southwest. And something I'll mention that I don't think is in here. A friend of mine worked with the Mescalero Apache, so this would be the different Apache bands in the Navajos. And a friend of mine worked with Mescalero, and he was told that they had a place name for where they separated from the Navajos, and it was in Yellowstone Park. And so I had close friends that are Navajo, and I asked my friend Raymond if they had a similar story, and he said he would have to ask his dad, and then he didn't get back to me for quite a long time, and then he said, I couldn't answer you until the Yebache ceremony, because that's when they recount the migration story. And so when they were doing that, my dad listened, because you know how you're singing a Christmas carol or something, you're not stopping and thinking about the words, you just know it. So that's how I guess the Yebache chant is, but in this case he was listening, and he affirmed they also had it, and it was around Yellowstone Lake, that they split, and some of them went on the east side of the mountains and some went on the west side of the mountains. So that's pretty amazing. And also just the oral histories that they would have a migration story that's 1,500, 1,200 years old and very intact, and they do it by chants. So by repeating it in song, they don't, everybody taught me in grad school, don't trust oral history, you know how telephone game works, don't you? Kind of like really dismissing oral history. And through numerous relationships within Indian communities, I've learned that it's the opposite. You can't change it. That is, they're always told like songs, and that you do them every year in the same time, same setting, in Taos Pueblo, it's down in the Kiva. And with the Navajos, it's during the Yebache chant, which they do in a canyon, and it echoes as they're singing. And the Kootenays, there are some stories in here that are really interesting about the depth of time that Kootenays are connected to that landscape on the west side of those mountains, with stories that don't change. But a friend at Taos said to me, I said, Ray, sounds like you're telling me a story that dates back to the Pleistocene. And I'm like, heck, I was a young PhD thinking I knew a lot. And he said, was very thoughtful, and then he said, I think I am. And it took me, I was probably rolling my eyes silently, quite, surreptitiously. And then he said, this is such a typical thing. I'm telling you this because it was, in my learning from shift over from books to people, people were always so generous with me. I mean, he could have just thought, you're such an idiot, like you really don't know anything, but you think you know everything. It's really kind of disgusting. He said, he gave it a lot of thought, and he said, it's like your silent night. You sing it over and over again every Christmas time, and you wouldn't change the words. And then he said, and in our situation, maybe it'd be the same, but there are elders that are going to correct you if you misspeak, because it has to be told the same way, because that's the only way they know their history, and they want to know and need to know their history. So I, just totally shifted. It kind of made me feel a little like I was standing on shaky ground, because I just put so many of my eggs in that academic basket, and the more I learned, the less I could stand on that ground. So it was really fun for me to write these stories, because it's kind of like my own evolution. At the same time, I'm understanding other people's, right? So back to the Old North Trail. I had the good fortune of learning a lot about uses around here of the Old North Trail in more recent times. There was there were a lot of stories like Blackfeet going down to the Pueblos, to same places I'm talking about. The one where at Picaris Pueblo, one of the women got, oh, this was a story about a woman who begged to come along. And often women traveled, you know, the whole families traveled, but this was more of a, I think they were gonna go steal horses, I think, capture horses down there. And this one woman said she wanted to come, and they said no. But if you ask 4 times with sincerity in Blackfeet world, you will be told yes. But then it's your risk, what happens to you, right? So anyway, she gets down there and they kidnap her at Picary's Pueblo, and then there's a whole story about having to go and rescue her, and she became kind of a problem on that trip. Okay, so I got to be friends with Lloyd Paul. Anybody here know Lloyd? So he was Métis and he lived in Augusta, and had grown up with grandparents who still were living in the old Métis colony up above there, and he was always interested in archaeology. Actually had an incredible collection, and in fact he was the first person who ever asked me for my autograph. Anyway, that just was like, what? Some little article in Archaeology in Montana, and he's all excited. Anyway, he was a great guy, and he had mesothelioma from working in the Kootenai forest, and so he had a portable oxygen tank, and he was like, "We're going out," you know, and so he would stay in the car, and he'd go up that trail, and look at this, look at that, and it was really a great time for me. So,
Sally.
Yep.
What happened to Lloyd Paul's arrowhead collection? Do you know?
Yes, he gave at least all the things from the Kootenai forest to the Confederated tribes. It's in their collections, yeah. And I had arranged that after we got to meet. It was like, why don't you talk with them? And it's all from their territory.
He was my Forest Service boss in 1966.
Really? Was
Yeah.
he always
in the Badger, actually.
Oh, huh.
And
then
he
his
was,
East Side collection, I can't remember, but I think like maybe to Helena, to the Historical Society.
yeah, it was quite the collection.
Yeah, oh yeah, and he took good care, like a professional would have, in terms of where things came from and everything. So he was an impressive guy, very small guy with little thin braids and a great nature. Anyway, he took me to see a lot of his remembered places from when he was, still going up in wagons with grandparents for the summer up along the front. So he told me about this one place north of Sun River on private property that he wished he could have reached the people so we'd get access, but he had not been able to. And he said that what I want you to see is this big boulder that's flat on top like the hood of a car. But what's interesting is it's covered with these little, small fist-sized cobbles. And he said, it's cultural for sure. I'm like, wow, I've been on lots of parts of the Old North Trail and seen cairns and other features, but this sounds really cool, right? So it's in my mind because he described it so well. So fast forward.
Have you seen that rock?
Hang on. don't rush me here. Well, here's the part we were talking about. A decade later, I was on the trail again and had an opportunity to go onto private land to investigate a stretch of the trail marked by a substantial line of stones crossing a flat on the south side of a steep drop-off to the confluence of the forks of Deep Creek, a tributary of the Teton. The cold wind coming down the valley and across the flat that day made me speculate that the long row of stones had been placed there as a windbreak so that people could see the trail despite accumulations of blowing snow. Because it was so critical with 2 deep creeks that if you missed that crossing, you'd be in trouble in a blizzard. You needed to know how to get down into the safety of the canyon there almost. So I really think that's what it was, and that's on that ranch. And then there were well-placed cairns right at the edge to show you once you got past that line, really, here's the trail, and sure enough, there's still the trail. Okay, so then, one funny thing about being down there that day, the foreman had said, make sure you got bear spray, big bear spray. He said the biggest grizz boar is has been around those parts, you know. So of course we're nervous and making a lot of noise, but once we got down there and you're kind of in the open, you know, we wanted to be quiet and do some filming. And we were with a guy from West Virginia that could not stop. Hey there! We're trying to film here, buddy. Anyway, we didn't see that bear, but I think it's the one that went through David Letterman's picture window. That was like, at the time, wasn't it the biggest grizz that they'd ever weighed or something?
Yeah.
In Montana?
Yeah,
Like 700 something
it
pounds.
was more than that.
More than that?
It was like 9
Oh geez.
or something, huge.
So I'm really glad we didn't run into that bear that day. Okay, then I had so many wonderful things happen. A friend was doing research on the lower part of the Lewis and Clark Trail above Canyon Ferry Reservoir. And he found cairns right along, and you could see tread and cairns, and then just below that is a place Lewis wrote about as the Crimson Bluff. Larry is an expert on all this stuff. And it turns out, the Salish called it Utsuman, which means red clay. The road to it was called Vermilion Road from over on the Clark Fork River in my area. And then it was the most sought after red paint in the whole region, really high quality red paint. And there were archaeological remains at Canyon Ferry, under Canyon Ferry, but a local collector found 12,000 years of evidence of use there. And the same period that Oxbow site, those sites were up a little bit, and there was ground stone, and they'd been grinding quinopods. So that same, all along the front, and were great sources of water were nearby. Okay, I bring up the red paint because it's part of another story in the book that I'm probably not gonna have time to tell you about, but really interesting. Anyway, okay, although I never set out to learn about paint, red ochre kept finding me. At a gathering of Kootenai elders in 2009 at Yellow Bay on Flathead Lake, John Masila told a story that mentioned collecting red paint on the other side of the mountains from their Tobacco Plains homeland. My jaw dropped when I heard what came next. He mentioned that when his ancestors safely crossed the divide and reached the foothills of the Sun River country on their excursions, they would give thanks by placing a cobble on a huge rock long used for that purpose by their people.
Wow.
So that memory of that big flat boulder and full of cobbles, and here's a man with the living memory from his own grandfather about the time when they used to go over. And those of you who've read People Before the Park know they would often go in the winter time of pull the packs up past Logan Pass and hunt down St. Mary's, and then work their way down, and then go up and end up in the South Fork and head back home. And but it turns out almost anything I've read where somebody's with Salish people going across to the mountains, and then in addition to this Kootenai story, they stop at that place for paint. It's like, we're close enough, we're gonna take a little beeline and go get some of that paint. And so this story ends not in the book, because afterwards, Gene Sense, some of you know him.
Showed up? Gene Sato showed up?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a retired teacher.
Right, yeah. So I don't know him. Well, I met him at the fall gathering at one point, but I don't really know him. Anyway, he had read the book, and he sends me an email, and he said, guess where I've been? And the ranch manager had taken him to see that feature. So he sent me a picture of it. And now that former ranch manager, is offered to take me. So after 25 years or whatever, I'm gonna get to go back and see that thing. So, and one thing I've done in this book is to put maps with everything, because history happened in places, it's not like free floating facts, but sometimes you're reading it and you don't know the place. And so I really loved working with Far Country because of what they provided in that way. There's a lot of images. And so I think oh yeah. So I just need to tell you the last 2 chapters. I'm not going to talk about them, but one is about the search for Shishikwa. That Lewis and Hardy were heading up the Old North Trail looking for this mountain called Shishikwa, and I'm like, what the heck is Shishikwa? Anyway, long story of tracking that down, and again, years of waiting to find out some history that came to me unexpectedly later. It was kind of like I'd given up on it, and then Blackbeat story that while I was at a ceremony, this unfolding of a story about, well, it's a French word meaning rattle, an old French word, and I always thought it was Square Butte that was called Rattle Hills, but it turns out that Haystack is kind of the center of that, and a member of the Crazy Dog Society said that's where we went to get the stones for our rattles, that place. And so the Rattle Hills, and somehow, in French, Shishikwa, so that's what Lewis heard the name as, and anyway, and that again was a story that took years and years to unfold, and just a crazy series of coincidences. And there's a picture of a crazy dog with one of the rattles from McClintock back at 1900 in here. And yeah, I would have asked my friend, but that would have been rude to say, can I put your picture in here too? Anyway, and then the last one is about my work in the Badger. Trying to document important cultural places as part of the traditional cultural properties aspect of the National Historic Preservation Act. And it's really a story of that naive anthropologist I've been telling you about being really ridiculous with the Blackfeet people, and again, their generosity and patience, because as much as they wish it weren't so, that's how the system worked. I was the one who was going to make a difference for them, and if I didn't understand it, they would lose. So they held my hand and really helped me shift the way I understood the world, really. So that's the last chapter. So that's it.
In this old North Trail, I understood that some people migrated from China across the Bering Strait and came down along the North Trail. Is that correct?
Well, it remains an interesting theory among a bunch of other evidence for ways that people found their way down here, because it does turn out that the ice-free corridor that had been speculated about to explain why Clovis and Folsom sites were where they were in New Mexico, that was a way to explain it. Well, okay, if you could get across the Bering Land Bridge, then you'd have to have a way to come down through the ice. There must have been an ice-free corridor between the big ice sheets, but people are having a hard time proving that to be true. So I hold this as an unsettled question to still be learned about. More will be known.
Well, there's another mystery too that kind of puzzles me, and you mentioned the Navajo tribe, I think, was that I think in the Chaco Valley, I believe it's in New Mexico, that Kit Carson and was it General Fremont?
That was
discovered the
Canyon
ruins of
Deshay.
Anasazi Indians
Yeah.
that were apparently they were very well developed. They had these fabulous housing, you might say, on the cliffs, carved out on the cliffs.
Oh, yeah.
And apparently they were pretty good agrarians, but they just suddenly died or disappeared in about the 12th century.
They just had to move for climate reasons, just like that other story. But so the people who are, the Pueblo people in New Mexico are the same people who used to live in those major centers.
Yeah.
They dispersed and went to water because they dried up in the Four Corners.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's good environmental evidence to back all that up. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Anybody have memories stirred up in places they know along the Old North Trail? Lewis and Clark Trail?
I'm old and bad.
One interesting fact that I stumbled onto doing some legal work is that Mormons used the Old North Trail to go north.
Oh, up to Cardston, that was,
Yeah.
they were, huh?
They were fleeing a prohibition on,
Polygamy.
polygamy.
Ah,
And they sent Brigham Young's son Card to build a temple. And they came up with Mormon carts, and they absolutely used the Old North Trail.
interesting.
I interviewed some.
When would that have been?
Mormons. In the 1860s,
Very interesting.
Young reached an agreement with President Grant to abolish polygamy.
Uh-huh.
And so Utah could be a state, and then he sent his son Card, Young did, north
Yeah.
into another country.
Uh.
And then what ties it locally is that those people sent a guy named Galbraith to start a ranch to raise horses for the army up by Bath, the ranch we still call the Galbraith.
Uh-huh. Huh.
And then he stiffed the church.
Ah.
He kept the land in his own name. And that became the Galbraith ranches that a lot of us are.
That's the Norfolk Ranch,
The
right?
North Fork now.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Huh. Really
But they
interesting.
all used that same trail to come north. That's my interruption.
Yeah, really interesting. Other,
Combining liquor.
Yeah.
Oh,
There.
yeah, no, that ties, Kelly's whispering in my ear. What ties it to East Glacier is that as they came north, they threw two, as was common in wagon trains, they threw two female babies out. Because that's what wagon trains did at times. The Mormons did. And they ditched them down by the old mission, and women, Blackfeet women picked them up and brought them up to the nuns. And one of them was Helen Edkins of East Glacier.
wow.
Wow.
Helen who?
Edkins. She had a little gift shop, and she was adopted by, help me out here,
Dawson.
Tom Dawson and his wife. And she didn't have a drop of Native American blood. But when they doled out the allotments on the reservation because of her connections, she got full blood allotments and ended up with a lot of the land around East Glacier.
Wow,
That's my story.
that's amazing. Thank you, Larry. God, you ought to write a book.
You know, I don't know, but Helen told me she had a sister.
But
Yeah.
why did they throw out the babies?
Females,
Females.
absolutely were.
Too much to support.
It was very common.
Yeah.
Mormon
Here we
wagon
are.
trains, right?
Oh,
Come on, I know there are more
I'll be there.
stories in here.
Except for in North,
Wow.
Old North Trail, Newbie, right? I mean, I've heard different stories,
Yeah.
but is there a place that, you know, where can I go?
The
see
Shoto Museum has a
Okay.
wonderful, is Dave doing the,
Yes, we just
tours?
did one with him a couple weeks ago, Dave Shea.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he usually does 3 a summer, I think, so maybe the last one coming up that you should
Okay.
check, so the Old Trail Museum in Shoto.
Okay.
And they've accumulated a lot, and there are some Métis people who still live in the area that have helped, put boulders marking places, important places along the trail, and really interesting. Did you love it, Gina?
I loved
Yeah.
it. And he showed us, I don't know if that was part of that, but he showed us the tiki rings.
Yeah.
That are, that were further east from the rocks on the trail, you
Mhm.
know? Well, I don't
Right.
know that, but that was really, really fun.
And the eagle trapping pit, did you see that? Cause he does two trips. Did you do the one with the eagle trapping pit?
He told us about it, but he didn't take us.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, really cool. Peter,
Let John go ahead and I'll ask my
John?
I was just, like, they have it well documented down in Teton County and whatnot. What percentage of the trail is documented in Glacier County, any idea?
Well, Barney Reeves did a aerial survey many years ago. He's passed on now, but I have all of his data transferred to my maps, and the place is best known in the, north of here. Well, it passes really close to where you guys live. And then, up by Duck Lake, there's real strong evidence. And it's not just a single trail. First of all, people tended to ride, a few abreast. And then, there's a high water trail and a low water trail. So depending on time of year you would be traveling, you'd be avoiding water, and then depending on crossings, depending on how much is in the runoffs and streams. So it varied. But, there are still places like, is it Black Butte? That is south of the Teddy Roosevelt. Is that what it is?
Blackleaf.
No, I think it is actually called Black Butte. It's kind of,
Does it go down to Sun River? Is it Black
Or-
Reef?
no, I think it's closer to the Teton. I'm sorry about this, I'd have to go back to an old map. Anyway, I went up on one, I think I maybe did it illegally. And you could really see trail tread. It's, it's south of Pine Butte, not too far south of Pine Butte, I think. Yeah. Peter?
Sally, thank you for being here, for the stories and the collections and all your work over the years. So if I could prompt you or to share just a little bit of one of either the last story in the book or another one about some of your work related specifically to Badger. Either the last, if I could prompt you, the last story in the book, to share that with us, or another one about your work related to the Badger.
You mean even though I'm going over time?
We don't care.
We don't care.
Oh.
If we cared, we don't let.
Okay, how about those of you who don't want to hear it, we'll give you a few moments and you can innocently depart. Well, I'm not going to do the background other than to tell you that the way I introduced, that we had gotten the contract from the Forest Service, from Historical Research Associates in Missoula, and my former husband and I went, and we'd had put an announcement in the local newspaper that we were holding a meeting at the high school gymnasium. So, complete outsiders here, we're gonna come tell you what we're gonna do to help save your place here. Well, not well attended, as you can imagine, and
Yeah.
nobody's talking, they're just kind of sneering, and you know how that is, the more people act differently, but I often talk faster, like somehow that's gonna help, and I repeat myself because maybe they didn't quite hear me. Anyway, it was bad, and then, I think that's when, Tiny Man Heavy Runner approached the tribal council and said, I'm chief of the Crazy Dogs and it's my traditional responsibility to be taking care of that area, so I'm gonna take over this project. And they said, you're right. So really interesting, the Tribal Business Council that's making all the kind of decisions with non-Indian people understood that in traditional law, it was his job. And he wanted it, they couldn't argue about it. So he took me under his wing. And again, that sense of it would be a great cost if he didn't to them. So he said, we're gonna have to start over. That wasn't a very good kickoff, was it? No. So he said, you're gonna have to put on a feed. Okay, well that wasn't in my budget, but we'll figure it out, So we did, and took our family, took our kids with us, and had a lovely evening. And I told my kids, you have to eat what's served here. It's really rude to say no. So they get served berry soup, Everybody tasted berry soup? Anybody not tasted it? Okay. Old traditional berry soup is fat and berries. So my kids aren't really too used to eating fat, right? And so they think they're all excited. They love berries, and then one bite and they know they can't be rude, so they're kind of looking at me like, what are we gonna do here? So they just put their spoons down, and then pretty soon an elder or two from across the table go, and then there was an exchange made, and they got doubles, So that all worked. And then we learned stick game afterwards, and everybody got to be friends. And that, you know, it was only gonna be after that kind of relationship building and more that then like, okay, you know, we're gonna start working together and we're gonna start seeing if we can actually trust you, but at least a little bridge had been made. So I learned so much, you know, just the way we do business, everything just fast and business-like, right? And that's just not how it works. So it was slow to get started, but then they just kept holding our hands and leading us to the right people to visit with about their experiences. And the biggest learning for an archaeologist in this position was that the idea of discrete archaeological sites in a spiritual area are incompatible worldviews. So you can't draw lines around, like, here's where I made a fire to sweat before I went up for my vision quest. And so you're gonna draw a line around that, and then up on the top where they sat, you know, and then everything else in between. And Tiny Man would say, how can you use this as a holy place if you're listening to machines and the water's polluted? You know, all of this needs to be left as it is. It's the whole thing. It took me a really long time to wrap my head around that and to understand how I would work between the language of the law or the regulations and the worldview of the Blackfeet. And, you know, ultimately recommended a historic cultural district. So it did embrace everything, but Hall Creek wasn't part of our study. And I was too stupid to push the Forest Service and say, just because we didn't have that in the original because it had already been surveyed, it doesn't mean it's not part of it. And I think we were supposed to go one more round, you know, like turning in a draft, and then Tiny Man would have come back but for some reason that final round didn't happen. So that, you know, later, some of you were probably involved in the second round of getting that whole area included. But, you know, I felt like I was kind of a cripple being helped along by, or I was partially blind and somebody was walking me through it. And then, you know, the good fortune in so many ways, like having Gloria Flora in that office at the Forest Service. Yeah, I mean, some other person would have just disregarded this, but she really got it. So, is that good, Peter?
Whatever you want to share,
Yeah.
A nice kind of coda for the evening.
Yeah, and it, you know, for me, I'd only really seen Browning when I came over to do that job. And who here knows how Browning became settled?
What?
How it became a town?
It was an agency, I mean, it was a.
The agent's wife didn't like living down on Badger Creek with those burials up on the ridge behind there from starvation winter. And so she said, there's all those pretty wildflowers up in that area, let's move the agency. But it was swampy and lots of people died, got TB, and it was a terrible time, and then it's so damn windy, right? So
Did you go to the meeting in Shoto?
I couldn't go, I sent a letter, yeah. Anyway, you know, I got to go down lower Two Medicine, lower Badger Creek, and you know, how sheltered and beautiful they are in the winter, and you just think, oh, this makes sense. Winter camps, you know, there were good places to be, and it sure as heck wasn't out on the prairie there. So that kind of thing it was all really life-changing for me. And really, you know, to make those connections and then be able to participate in their ceremonial life in subsequent years as I'm a different person.
Did you get to meet some of the elders on like Badger Creek and
Yeah,
out there?
yeah, and here's incredible stories. Yeah, you probably knew a lot of those people.
I probably did, but.
Yeah.
Who would you consider your best archaeological source for the Blackfeet Nation? Assuming he's still alive.
Who
Who
did,
would you consider
oh,
your best archaeological source?
yeah,
In other words, identifying sites and being able to tell you some history to that.
Oh,
John.
well, probably John now. You know, in the day I was working, it was Curly Bear Wagner, it's long gone. And Nieves Cedeno, the archaeologist from Arizona that's done a lot of work with John, is really knowledgeable. However, the big site they were digging south of the entrance, I don't know, was 6-7 years ago. I would think it lasted a few years. I know that at least John just assumes it's Blackfeet because it's right there at the edge of the res. I give 99 to 1 that it's Kootenai, because that was their traditional winter hunting area, because the Blackfeet were further down the big rivers. And it fits all the stories from Kootenai, and I haven't ever looked at the archaeological materials they pulled out of there, but it fits with their world. And you know, the story was they take the packs up to the top of the pass and then shoot them down, just let them slide, and then they would slide and hook up with their, and then they camp at St. Mary's.
There's the old Buffalo Trail in Trail Creek in the North Fork.
Yeah,
And they would
yeah,
go over South Kootenai Pass. The Kootenai,
for sure, yeah.
500 horses up that trail at
Yeah.
one time.
And that Trail Creek, you know, so,
I've seen some of the pictographs.
yeah, me too. Yeah,
We won't tell them.
yeah. Well, it's such a bad road, nobody wants to go up there anyway.
That's right.
You have to go up the North Fork to even
Yeah,
start.
exactly right.
So thanks again, guys, for coming out tonight.
Sally, I'd love to gift you. You can pick a different size or color or item if you want, but this is a
That's
protected badger shirt
beautiful.
flag.
Who designed it?
Jessie Stevenson, she's,
Oh, I know Jessie.
you know Jessie,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Oh,
She's a
beautiful.
close friend of ours
Yeah,
in Missoula.
thank you.
So thank you all for coming tonight. Please feel free to stick around and mingle. If you're not already on our email list, please sign up. It's on the back table. You can check out some other information there. And hope to see you at a walk or at the fall gathering later this fall. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And Sally, thank you
I'd
again
like
for
to see
blessing
you
us with
buying
your time.
books for me at the back table.
Oh yeah, buy Sally's book. Nobody can leave until she's sold out. Lock the door.
Sally, you gotta promise one thing, you'll sign it.